Okay.
Right. Okay. Are we ready? Yeah. All right then. So we're going to discuss that. This is the first of four episodes that I'm going to be discussing social history of Ireland and emphasizing on the society and what was going on in the society. So we'll have a anthropological focus of a sort, and we will start the four parts. So the first part is from antiquity to roughly the start of the early Christian period. Then we go through the early Middle Ages. That's the second part. And then the third part is the later Middle Ages. And the fourth part will be the completion of the conquest by the English crown in the 16th, 17th centuries, and the end of Gaelic society as it stood. Okay, so we're going to start in the first part now. So this is up to the onset of Christianity, and we are dealing with this picture, incidentally, behind the writing here is an artist's impression of a probably late Bronze Age to early Iron Age Enoch or fair. They're sort of called fairs, but they're more like a festival for a group of tribes or tuas who had assembled at this particular point because they had some sort of connection to it. So that's what that picture is. We can now move on to picture 2, slide 2, please. Yeah. So this is what we're dealing with to begin with. We're going to start right at the beginning. So when the ice sheet started to retreat, we have what we known as the Paleolithic period in Ireland. We don't know very much about this. All we've discovered is because there was a second ice age, a mini ice age, which obliterated quite a bit of Ireland, but the southern part of Ireland was outside the ice sheet, and in the Paleolithic period, and this is the period of the great Irish elk, which is a very large deer of the size of a moose or bigger, which had huge antlers, things like this. We suspected that no human beings had arrived in that period, but we have found actual evidence now of a bear, of a tool which had been used to skin a bear. So obviously there was some sort of Paleolithic peoples had penetrated Ireland. However, they must have quickly withdrawn once the mini ice age started, because the mini ice age it came in, and interestingly, all the deer left Ireland in this period, but the wolves remained. So this is interesting because so what the wolves exactly survived on, I'm not sure, unless they survived on each other or wild pigs or something, because when we arrive in the Mesolithic period, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, there were no there was no deer in Ireland. So anyway, as you can see, the land masses of Ireland and its nearest neighbor Britain, they were originally joined, of course, but this is a rough idea of what it looked like between about 15,000 and that should actually say 6,000, not 16,000 years ago. Now the period spans the first recession of the Great Ice Age ice sheets, and the Paleolithic period ends, and the mini ice age that intervened between the former era and the Mesolithic, which covered the ice sheets came back again and covered most of Ireland at that point, but not all of it, but a fair bit of Ireland. And Ireland was already starting to break apart from what would become Britain. Britain was also joined to the continent by what's known as Doggerland. So there was a land bridge at that point where roughly the North Sea is at present time. If you look at the yellow bits, you'll see roughly how in that series of pictures you can see roughly how the land retreated into the between the period of between 15,000 and 6,000 years ago. You can see how the current coastlines took shape, because they took shape in that period, and the yellow bits on those maps show the parts that were at one point covered by land, and even right up until the arrival of the Mesolithic, the New Stone Age hunter-gatherers, there wouldn't have been so much of a gap between Ireland and Britain, but they would still have to cross water. So the Mesolithic era begins roughly about, give or take, roughly about 7,500 BC. So that's after the mini ice age recedes. It seems to be mainly limited to the coasts and waterways, the settlement patterns that have survived, put it that way. We are not sure, because Mesolithic or hunter-gatherer societies don't leave very much to be found later on. So there is you're just getting middens basically, and maybe some tools that have been assembled in spots where settlements accumulated. But of course the settlements were always moving as well, so being hunter-gatherers, they didn't really stay in one place for very long. So the estimated population, maximum population of Ireland in this period was roughly about 8,000 people. So that's not very many. In the whole of the island, about 8,000 people. And they would have been, their big game hunting would have been maritime, because inland, the only sort of meat that they would be able to get hold of would be wild pigs, because Ireland was very heavily forested at the time, but there were no deer, as I've explained earlier. So that meant that there would have been a good reason to stick to the coasts and to stick to the waterways, because you were really only going to get your your meat sustenance or your fish sustenance from the sea. You weren't going to get it from anywhere else. But of course, as we all know, or we should know, that hunter-gatherer societies are always a lot more heavy on gathering than they are on hunting. So we're always in danger of overemphasizing hunting, because gathering, you could gather fungus, you could gather seaweeds, you could gather nuts, and so on and so forth. This is generally the activity of women and children, while the men would be more disposed to hunting. So I mean, there would have been berries and wild vegetables, things like this here, which they would have been able to pluck in the right times. So the Mesolithic, New Stone Age settlers came from Western Britain. They perhaps came across to the southeast first, though most of the finds that we have so far been in the north. The River Shannon is the first burial cremation site that we have found related to the Mesolithic. Has been found on the River Shannon, which is on the west of Ireland, round about the centre. And other early Mesolithic campsites have been found at Loch Bura in the Midlands and Antrim and Derry in the north. They used a type of tool. It's known as the Bann flake, and it's known as a lithic tool, and it provided just this basic tool provided a versatile range of uses for the inhabitants. So say one Bann flake could be used as a spearhead, it could be used as a knife, it could be used as an axe head, it could be used as a digging tool, it could be used for a number of different purposes. Little evidence of middle to late Mesolithic settlement can be found in Ireland, except at Newferry in County Antrim, where we have a continuous period of settlement at the Newferry site over a extended period. That's the only one we found. There's very little evidence of Mesolithic Ireland, in fact, at all. If we could now move to the next picture, please. Yeah, so this is an artist's impression of what the scenery might have looked like. So the vast majority of the country is covered by forest. There's quite a bit of bog as well, and mountains and so forth. But here we have some coastal settlements, and we have some coracles, presumably in the water there, where people are fishing, and then there are a couple more further settlements inland, but they're very small settlements, as we've already said. And there's another one over to the left. Okay, we can have the next picture, please. Yeah, so this is the type of house or dwelling building that they would have constructed, we think. Now, whether they're covered with reeds, as they have done here, or whether they're covered by skins, we're not entirely sure. But but this would have been the sort of huts they were living in, a little bit like Native American wigwam type dwellings. We have from the next picture, number 5. Yeah, and these are the assorted Bann flakes of the Mesolithic. So, so as I say, you can see that these type of tools are quite big for flint tools, but as I say, they can be used for a wide variety of different purposes. Okay, next picture, please. Yeah, so we're now moving on to the Neolithic. So the Neolithic really starts around about 4,500 BC. It's cognate, the culture which takes place in or settles in Ireland is cognate with the same, obviously competently maritime culture, because they moved all the way from up the coast from what was the Western Mediterranean, so Italy and Spain mainly, and they came up the western coast of France, and then they also settled in Ireland, they settled in Britain, and they settled in a little bit around the Calais region and the Low Countries, and on into Scandinavia. This is very similar culture, if not the same culture. And in fact, the DNA seems to suggest that they were the same people. But they were not the Mesolithic people. Now, what happened to the Mesolithic people, we don't know, but there was only 8,000 of them. And by the time the Neolithic was at its height, there was about maybe between 100,000 and 200,000 people on the island. So as you can see from this picture, you can see that settlements are starting to expand, and people are starting to farm now, and they are growing crops, and they are also herding animals. So there's quite a bit of forest clearance going on, but we suspect that a lot of the movement was around waterways and around the coasts, because there's no evidence at this point, of much serious travel across the country, on land, that is. So the Neolithic, the DNA of the buried remains, as I've already said, points to a common ethnic cultural heritage with the culture I've already mentioned, that spreads all the way from the Western Mediterranean and North Africa all the way up to Scandinavia, in fact. And it's distinct from the earlier era Mesolithic inhabitants, although there is some evidence of intermarriage. One of the things you have to be careful of is this idea that one load of people arrive and then they wipe out them, and then or the original inhabitants, and then along come another bunch and they wipe out them, and so on and so forth. And this sort of theory, even though it's very popular, say about 50 to 100 years ago, it's being increasingly questioned. And we think, I mean, there was only 8,000 of the Mesolithic people, and they probably in time married into the Neolithic period, and they haven't left much trace because there weren't very many of them. What interesting about the Neolithic is we wouldn't have a huge amount of evidence about them except for their means of entombment, which is quite important. The new settlers had brought sheep, they brought goats and cattle, and they grew cereals, primarily wheat and barley. And they also, again, this is interesting, they brought deer. So they presumably were hunters themselves. And they let the deer loose in the countryside, and soon humans were able to hunt deer as a form of big game. And presumably the wolves were very happy about that as well. They didn't have to eat so much pork. Despite ample evidence of intensive farming and the clearing of the lighter upland soils, no evidence exists of land highways, indicating that waterway travel remained paramount in a land still under heavy forest and bog or marsh, especially in the central lowlands. Evidence of two types of simple basket pottery culture exists. If you want the technical terms, it's cardium stroke la oget, and a more specialized range of stone tools than was evident under the Mesolithic. So, and as I said, we can talk about a total population of between 100 200,000. Next picture, please. Yeah. So this is the sort of hut that we think. Well, we actually discovered several farmland areas, quite extensive farmland areas and settlements, and this is the sort of house that your average peasant farmer would have lived in. And if you see where the two tufts of the building are, well, that's where the smoke would have come out from the hearth inside the hut. But as you can see, it's built the roof is made of reeds, and the building is made of timber, poles and wattle and daub. Okay, next picture. Number 8, that's it. Yeah. Okay. Now, of most interest in the Neolithic, however, is the surviving evidence we have of the enormous effort they went to for building megalithic monuments of interment for the dead. There are roughly, in total, about 1,200 of these all over across the island. Now, it seems that well, not everybody got buried there. In fact, a very small minority of people got buried there. And you can look upon them as perhaps being an elite, except, well, we know that they were very closely interrelated. In fact, there's been a recent DNA test on one of the bodies found in Newgrange in central Ireland. And it seems that his parents were very closely related indeed. In fact, so much so that they were probably brother and sister. But we've also discovered that other remains that are found, they seem to be related in a lot of cases to the same familial gene pool, not as closely interrelated as that, but still, you know, close enough to make you think that maybe these people were viewed themselves as being special, because you have this, you know, the pharaonic families of Egypt. They married brother and sister, and so on and so forth. So it could have been a bit like that. But the thing is that we don't have any evidence of, or we have very little, in fact, no evidence of warfare, and or of like military power, usually temporal power. If you've got spiritual power, it comes with temporal power, and there's no evidence of temporal power. But this is the period where obviously they had very, very advanced astronomical they knew everything about the sun, the moon, and the planets and the stars. We know this because some of the graves are connected. They show up on equinoxes, on the summer and winter equinox. Shafts of light go right into the heart of the tomb. Now, whether these were even tombs is debatable. We have found bodies in them, not very many bodies, but we have found a few. But does that make them tombs? Well, maybe not. Maybe they, you know, these people were seen as being particularly valued, so they were buried there. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it was designed as a tomb. It could have been designed more as a ritual center, because we also know that a lot of these Neolithic monuments, when they were first constructed, they would have been brilliant auditoriums. So if you can imagine a whole lot of people maybe on, I don't know, maybe intoxicated in some form, and they're beating away on their drums and so on inside these stone monuments, and the sound is reverberating off the walls, and there's probably pictures which are being lit by torchlight, painted pictures or painted patterns on the walls, and you've got quite an experience, and I suspect that's more what they were used for rather than as just tombs. So they're huge stones often were used to build these things, and they're dragged or floated. I would question whether they were dragged. I think they were floated, and then they were probably moved in an upright position rather than in being dragged, because that would be really difficult to do. And from one end of the country to another. So it's not just like the stones were all gathered in the area. No, not at all. Sometimes especially the bigger stones seem to be moved from one end of the island to another, or in the case of Britain, similarly, where you got places like Stonehenge and so on. And so a huge amount of labor must have been marshaled to construct these sites, but there's no sign of, as I say, military camps, you know, forcing people to work, because you'd need an army to do that if they were being forced to do this. but there doesn't seem to be any evidence of this. As I say, no remains of even the normal large prestige buildings. There's nothing even of that nature that one would associate with an aristocratic elite able to command the labor for megalithic monument building. But we must assume, therefore, that whatever power they wielded resided elsewhere than in the economic military fields. I mean, as I say, if they said that they had control over the sun and the moon, and they were able to time everything perfectly, which they certainly were, and they would have known all the seasons. So there was probably something more in the theological field that they were, that was where their power lay in terms of. The types of tombs are very varied and are even unevenly spread across the country, but they include, which I'll talk about in a minute, include court cairns, which is this picture here, and dolmens, wedge tombs, and most important of all, passage tombs. And ritual henges were built, and nothing like as grand as Stonehenge, but ritual henges built of stone or wood. Wood henges are quite very common in Ireland. These would have been pillars or tree trunks stripped of all the branches, and then presumably they might have been painted, they might have been carved or whatever, and put in the ground. Unfortunately, none of the wood has survived, of course, but the post holes for these for the wooden posts have been found. Right, this one is what's known as a court cairn. The court cairns are mostly found in the northern half of the country, and if you look at the far enclosure, you see that is the the court part of the because it was is the court part of the cairn, because you would go into the court area, and then you would enter through that tunnel there and into the inner chamber. Okay, next picture, number 9, please. Yeah. Now this is a dolmen, and the dolmens are mainly found in the north center or southeast of the country, and there's another batch also in County Clare. I've actually been to that particular dolmen. I've actually, because I was based in County Clare for a wee while, and I actually went to this particular dolmen. Now, a dolmen has a huge slab of stone on top. We think that they also had, it was also covered in a cairn of much smaller stones and probably earth, and the angle of the capstone is always at a 30-degree angle. Okay, next picture. Number 10, please. No, number 10, yeah. Now, this is a wedge tomb. They're mostly found in the south and in the west of the country. It's got a capstone similar to the dolmen, but the the slabs are not quite so big, and it's always level rather than at a 30-degree angle. Okay, next one. Number 11, please. Yeah. So this is a passage grave. The passage graves are found in a belt across from County Sligo in the northwest to County Meath in the centre east. A quite broad belt across the country, and they also provide us with some of our greatest monuments at all, right? But you can see here at this is the entrance in the middle of it. That's fairly obvious. And then you go along a passageway, and there's usually a shaft, a horizontal shaft above the actual passageway, and when you reach the center of the mound, that is where it ends in a sort of cruciform shape, with insets inside the structure, and that's where the light carries on down the overlying shaft above the actual entrance that connects up with the equinoxes. Okay, we'll have the next picture, please. Right. Okay. Right. This is the best known of Ireland's passage graves, and it's the Newgrange complex. Some of you may have been there if you've been to Ireland. This is a big tourist destination. It's a bit too big of a tourist destination. It's actually really quite. There's masses of coach trips there, and it's really quite crowded out with people, and it's very expensive as well. But as I'll explain, there are alternatives to Newgrange, and they are very close to Newgrange. Now, Newgrange has been fully restored as it would have looked back in the day. So you can see that's the top picture there. That's roughly what it looks like. It's enormous structure. And the overlying shaft above the entry passage, which you can see in the bottom picture, this aligns precisely, with the rising sun at the summer and winter equinoxes, even to this day, sending a shaft of light to illuminate the innermost sanctum of the monument. Newgrange is, however, only the most famed of three monuments of equal scale and majesty, and all three of them are located in the Boyne Valley, which is very close by. Bruna Boyne, which is the Irish name for the area, was obviously a ceremonial center of huge importance in its day. The second passage grave complex, which I would recommend that you visit. There's far fewer people go there, and it's been largely restored as well. So it's makes a very worthwhile trip. Is at Nath, and work has also begun on the third of these structures at Douth, but the Douth one, to my knowledge, has still not developed to a great degree. Now you can see this big stone in front of Newgrange there. That's a very famous stone with the spirals, and these sort of carvings, along with stroke and cut marks are very, very common in the Neolithic art of the period. Okay, so we can now move on to the next one, next picture. Right, this is a wood henge. There's an inner circle here. Now, those were not wooden. We think that they were just trenches dug in the ground. But if you look at the outer, there are two circles outside the inner circle, and the two outer circles are where the posts would have been placed in the ground with the that would have made up the wood henge. And we only discovered this because it was detected from air in a very dry summer. I think it was 2016. And these sort of things are being discovered all the time. So, and again, this one is very close to the other monuments that we've been talking about. So obviously this is a hugely important ritual center. All right, so we'll have the next picture now. So that's 14. Okay, so we're now moving on to the next period. Now this is there is a bit of overlap between the late Neolithic and the early Bronze Age, or the Copper Age, as perhaps we should refer it to as. Bronze came a bit later on. They overlap to a degree, but there's an unexplained collapse of the megalithic building culture that seems to have taken place around about 2500 to 2000 BC. And it came with a significant fall in the population. Now, how that happened, we no idea, but presumably this culture, for some reason or another, maybe 1 year the crops failed, and that had a big impact on this elite who were associated with these monuments, and people thought, well, I'll just stay at home instead of dragging my stones halfway across the country. Now, I should talk about a little bit about this. David Graeber is an anthropologist. He talks about cultures that become very hierarchical only at certain times of the year, or maybe once every 10 years or 5 years or whatever. And possibly this is the origins of this group of people who were obviously very specialized, but for the vast majority of the time they would have been just doing the same work that everybody else was and living in the same sort of huts as everybody else was. But at during the festival periods, they would have suddenly acquired huge importance, and would have possibly lived in temporary constructions to suit their status, and so on and so forth. And David Graeber says that these sort of cultures are quite common in the Stone Age across the world. And where were we? Yeah. So this is a gold lunula, which is a type of it's actually gold. It's not bronze, because Ireland started to develop. It started to mine copper especially around County Kerry in the south west of the island, but also they started to mine gold. And it seems that Ireland was producing, at this point, was producing large amounts of copper and large amounts of gold. They got the tin, it seems, from what's now Cornwall in the southwest of England. And and with the tin combined with the copper, they were able to make bronze. So this lunula here, this went. These were very popular, not only in Ireland. We found several in Ireland, but we've also found them in Britain, and we've also found them all over Western Europe, and not just the design, the actual Irish gold. So it was actually mined here in Ireland, and then it was presumably transported. People heard about these things and they wanted one for themselves. Maybe some big shots living somewhere wanted one, so so he would order it. It was a sort of I don't know, Amazon or something at the time. Right, we can have number 15 now. Yeah, so as I say, there is an evidence now of a predominantly new ethnic racial group that seem to be early Indo-Europeans arriving from Europe via Britain and France. Known in archaeology as the bell/beaker culture. It's based that title is based on the shape of their pottery. The first Irish copper mine found so far in Ireland is from 2400 BC, and the first prestige goods made in bronze alloys were able to emerge around about 2000, including aristocratic style weaponry and decorative apparel. The aristocratic weaponry starts out pretty basic, but it soon evolves as the Bronze Age continues. Kerry and Cork's where the Irish copper mines are concentrated, and an estimated 370 tons were produced in total. By 1800 BC, there was also an industry, as I've explained, mining the gold that made up the lunulae, the bullae, gorgets, torques, sun discs, etc., many of which are also found in hoards in Britain and Europe. The megalithic tombs and monuments were abandoned, but they were not disrespected. This is important. So whatever happened to the original inhabitants, we know that some of them, at least, integrated with became integrated into the new bell beaker culture, but the majority seems to have disappeared now. Whether they died of a disease or whatever, we don't know. A plague, it could have been whatever. But by and large, cremations were starting to replace burying your dead in either in barrows or sometimes in barrows rather, and by and large replacing the formerly more prevalent inhumations of the dead who were seen to be privileged. Right, can we have a picture of 15, please? Slide 15. Hello? Yeah, yeah. So this is on the left there you have an early torque. Now torques are normally associated with the Celts and things. This is a very early style of torque on the left, and then you have these rather strange gorgets here on the right. Both items are made of gold. And next picture, please. Yeah, so this is these are from a hoard. There's bronze weapons and other prestige items. These were often, we managed to get these in such good condition. We've got swords, we've got shields, we've got trumpets, we have spearheads, axe heads, and we have various other things as well. But these are the bulk of things, and they were deposited in lakes often into the Iron Age, we think, as well. But the iron has deteriorated, whereas the Bronze Age ones have survived if they were deposited in peaty lakes, you know, a lake or a loch with a peaty bottom to it, which preserved the hoard that had been deposited there as an offering to some god or goddess of the loch. Now over there on the right, you can see that there's an interesting in the middle of the picture on the right. Alessandro, you're able to point to it? Yeah. So this is they call it a halberd. Now, I think they're trying to think of something to call it. It doesn't look like a weapon to me. It certainly hasn't got very sharp edges. We have no idea what this item was for, but the archaeologists in their wisdom have decided to call it a halberd. I think it was more likely some sort of ritual tool of some kind. Okay, we can move on to the next one now. So 17, yeah. Right. Now this is the Clonycavan Bog Man. Now we also have a few of these. These are ritual killings. We've discovered them also, as probably many of you might be aware of, the Tollund man, who was in northern Germany. He was buried in a bog with he's got a hat on and stuff. He's probably the best preserved. This guy is not so well preserved. We've lost quite a bit of his body, but still his body was preserved, and he was killed again in a lake. He was deposited in a lake. The lake, so bodies of water associated with a god or a goddess seem to be very, very important to the culture. And he is assumed to be, Clonycavan Bog Man is assumed to be, because he was killed in a very ritualistic manner. And we think that he might have been a deposed king or chieftain, and he was hit over the head, I think, and had his neck broken or something like this. He was hit twice, and as you can see, his hairstyle is quite unusual. It was a sort of Mohican crossed with a DA, so sort of cross between a punk Mohican Elvis Presley. Quite unusual. Okay, we can move on to picture 18 now. Right. So the biggest find of Irish late Bronze Age bronze gold coin items comes from the Dowris hoard, dating from between about 900 and 600 BC. By this time, we can see evidence of a distinctly Celtic style culture starting to emerge with these ritual killings and the ritual deposits of prestige items in the lakes. That's also a very Celtic thing to do, and it starts to emerge around about 1000 BC with an aristocracy that glorified fighting, hunting, and feasting. One can guess that if the main Irish language was not already a Celtic one, it almost certainly was by this point. There is little evidence of wholesale replacement by new groups from abroad after 2000 BC. There doesn't seem to be very many people. I mean, obviously there was some travel backwards and forwards, but not that much. It doesn't seem to be that much. And so the developments of the later Bronze Age merge into that of the early Iron Age, the Hallstatt or Latène cultures, differing only so far as the replacement of bronze weaponry with iron ones is concerned. And that coincides with the collapse of the Irish copper and gold mining industries and a sharp decline in the number of grave hoards that have survived. The rather lackluster Irish Iron Age, in archaeological terms that is, not in other terms, that succeeded it is most likely to have been ushered in through diffusion, but mainly by traders and possibly migrating elite groups from Britain, Gaul, and perhaps Spain from round about 400 BC. We can have the next picture now, number 18, slide 18. Yeah. So this is now, as I say, there isn't a huge amount of difference between late Bronze Age and early Iron Age. This is the sort of house that would have appeared in or would have been built from the late Bronze Age onwards as a sort of typical free farmer's house. So the generally circular wattle and daub walls and wooden framework and thatched reed roof, and with the smoke from the hearth in the center escaping up through the usually a hole in the roof or some way of getting the smoke out of the building, and the people would have slept around the fire in maybe semi-private cubicles at the side of the structure, where they would have lived, made with hides and things like this here. So next picture, please. Right, this is we're now moving into the early Iron Age. Though this is Rathgall hill fort in County Wicklow. Now, if you the structure at the center of it seems to be a cashel and was probably not there at the beginning. The cashels came later on, but it probably had those two outer walls at the beginning. So a lot of these sort of structures are found all across what would become the Celtic world. And they seem to have been some sort of center where you may have gone to as a place of refuge. Say if there were continual cattle raids going on at this point, and maybe it might have been a refuge for people during a cattle raid, or with the number of chariots they were starting to use, it could have been a base for chariots as well. So, you know, you would, if you heard that there's a cattle raid going on in your area, maybe, and you had all your chariot warriors within one of these things, then you just mounted up in your chariots and you drove on out. So this is the Rathgall hill fort in County Wicklow. And then there was a second type of structure built, which is in the next picture, 21. Oh, we seem to have missed out one. Sorry about that. We should go back. If we could go back to, please, Alessandro. 2. Back to 18. One more. That's it. Yeah. So this is a crannog. They're quite important things to talk about. There are quite a lot of crannogs being found all over Ireland. It's a type of homestead built on an artificial island. So quite a lot of labor would have gone into it, but from the late, they're built from the late Bronze Age, and they carry right on through to the early medieval era. Despite their modest, they have very modest defenses. I mean, how you're supposed to defend that against really determined attackers, I have no idea. But they may have provided some sort of extra security against raiding parties. Okay, we can go back to the promontory fort on 21. 21, please. Yeah. Yeah, that one. Right. So this is what's known as a promontory fort. This is Dunangus on the Aran Islands, also very famous. Now, these were built along a cliff edge generally, and they have quite substantial defenses in front of them, or seem to be defenses. But once again, it's been argued that they actually work better as auditorium spaces than actually defensive structures. We don't really know. They might have been a combination of various different things. But these are the sort of structures which were starting to be built around about the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age in Ireland, and seem to be cognate with the setting up of various different tribal groups that we will soon discover. Okay, we can I'll just talk briefly about the Iron Age then. So there's a significant lack of archaeological evidence from early Iron Age Ireland. Most of what does remain, as explained, seems to either continue in the general theme of the late Bronze Age, albeit adopting some of the technological stroke artistic innovations from either the Hallstatt or Latin. The building of both promontory and, to a lesser extent, hill forts, which is a peak, probably built as temporary refuges against the endemic cattle raiding warfare that dominates the heroic epics from this period, which were taken down by Irish monks in the early medieval era. However, little other evidence of dwellings exists, and perhaps the most perhaps indicating both a general decline in population, possibly, or combined with maybe a leveling down of a previously dominant class that had so ostentatiously displayed its wealth in gold and bronze. Maybe the new kings or chieftains, whatever they wanted to call themselves, were actually pretty hard up. The roads were mentioned in the early annals from about 100 BC, according to the annals, should I say, from about 100 BC, and their roots can be mapped out through archaeology. The 2nd century AD geographer Ptolemy gives us our first political map of Ireland at the start of the later Iron Age, which divides into 20 or so polities with a few groups and known sites recognizable from the early historical era marked out. The Romans, who had conquered much of Britain, decided not to invade Ireland, although evidence of trade exists, in particular one of these promontory forts called Dromana, which is just south of Dublin. And possibly a Roman expedition, is this possibility a Roman expeditionary force might even have assisted at least one deposed Irish king to reclaim his throne. It wouldn't have been a proper invasion, but they may have sent some troops to help this at least one deposed Irish king to reclaim his throne. We know that Agricola, who was a Roman general in Britain in the late 1st century AD, that he was definitely approached by an Irish king who wanted his throne back, but they decided not to help him. Okay, so we can have the next picture now. So that's 2022, yeah. So this is a diorama at Navan in County Armagh, where a particularly important site, a ritual site, mainly ritual. It may have had some defensive purposes as well, but we think it was predominantly ritual. This is a huge structure. You can see on the left, you can see the sort of there are a few people scattered around. There's like 2 of them over there, and that's giving you the idea of the scale of this building here, with all the posts that are making it up, and it doesn't look like it was a habitation or a throne room or something like this. In fact, we think it was a ritual center of some kind. Maybe there was all sorts of weird stuff going on with incense and smoke and druids intoning or whatever. We don't really know. But it was definitely this is a huge structure. There are a few others that exist in Ireland, or that we think were built on the hill of Ishnach and possibly at Tara in the centre of Ireland. But this is the one that has been most successfully excavated, and we know as well that whoever was responsible for this structure had some sort of trading contact with the Western Mediterranean, because we've discovered a buried Barbary ape and the Barbary ape must have come from North Africa. So that's quite interesting. All right, can we have the next picture? And that oh yeah, and that one would have this is the Ammon market is where the Táin or the Ulster cycle of Irish legends takes place. Okay, so we'll have the next picture now, 23. Right, this is based on Ptolemy's map of Hibernia. Ptolemy was a Roman, well, he wasn't really a Roman, he was a Greek, but he served the Romans and he made them a map of all their, he traveled the entire empire and he made a map that showed all the areas in and around the Roman Empire. He made a map of Britain and a map of Ireland as well. They are not very accurate, I'm afraid, around the coastline. And you can see the dark line is the shape that he drew, which is obviously not like the real Ireland that he would have been confronted with, but he did it, I think, partly because he didn't really know what they didn't have the modern technologies that we have today. Now, it shows a number of tribes, as I've said, or national groups, whatever you want to call them. But there's around roughly about 20 of them are marked. There's an interesting group in the south called the Brigantes. Now, they and at least another two groups are very closely related to tribes already in Britain. So this could indicate, maybe that it indicates that they worship the same goddess. They might not have been related at all, but it's possible that they were branches of the same ethnic group. And then in the north, you see the Volunti are marked out, and they have a capital based near them. And now that again ties in with the Ulster, the Uli, who will appear later on. They would have been, the Volunti is probably the Romanization of the Uli, or the Ulster, the Ulster dynasty, which would have been hugely important and very powerful at the time when Ptolemy was traveling around and drawing his maps. Okay, so we can move on to 24. Right, now I'll just talk briefly about this. This is what's known as a Fuluchthia. Now, Fuluchthia has been found all over Ireland. We've got roughly about 6,000 of them, I think. They're also found in other places. Some are found in Britain as well. And they're very common feature of the Irish countryside from the Bronze Age onwards. It's a trough or hole fitting a sealed basin to heat water. You can see that in the center there. Using red hot stones that are being dragged from a fire nearby. So that's what heats the water. Now they're often used to boil up meat. So big joint of meat wrapped in straw was chucked into the water, and then they would boil it with a whole lot of hot rocks that were dropped periodically from the fire into the water. Some of them may have had lids as well, so that would make it easier to conserve the heat. But the Fuluffia could also be used for a variety of different purposes. We've discovered that they may have been used for bathing, for brewing beer, or even dyeing textiles. Fuluffia contain very diverse waste in their refuse middens. And over there on the right, far right, you can see one of these refuse middens developing here. So once everybody had finished whatever they were doing here in the Fuluffia, they chucked it in the middens, which is where we find a whole lot of a whole variety of different purposes. Okay, we can go on to 25 now. Yeah. So this is the classic Iron Age torque. This is a gold torque from the Breuter hoard found in Ireland. As you can see, it's quite a magnificent example, and it would fit around your neck. Okay, we have the next picture, number 26. Yeah, so this is a chariot of the Latin era. This is a light pony-drawn vehicle with suspension like this construction. They actually had suspensions. They weren't just like a really badly made cart. They actually had good suspensions. And they would have carried around aristocratic warriors drawn by two ponies at the front of you can see them at the front of the vehicle. And they would have carried some spears on board, and the warrior would have run around in one of these things. They're often called people talk about the Iliad and all the rest of it. They talk about the chariot was used as a battle taxi, so they would be engaged in bravado, bouts of single combat with heroes on the other side, and also they'd be very useful for raiding as well. And this sort of activity is well described in the Irish heroic tales known as the Ulster Cycle. Okay, we can have the next picture now. Right, now this is we're starting to go on now. So the later Iron Age certainly starts to manifest from this time onwards. Not only was the population growing significantly, but also the large polities of Ptolemy's maps seem to have been being broken down into a plethora of rival minor dynasties known as the Tuatha. And they were forged on descent ties to ancestral kings. We call them kings because the Irish word for king is cognate with rex in Latin. So in one sense they're kings, but in what power they wielded, they were at best they were chieftains, really. But they're now, its descent is more important than what was originally, we think, in the former period, the period of Ptolemy's maps. It was ancestral gods or totems. were what made up the names. Now, when you get into this period, they're talking about being descended from a particular individual, by and large, not entirely, but by and large, they're talking about being descended from one particular individual. These kings or chieftains were intent on achieving plunder and slaves from a declining Roman Britain, to reward their followers and in showing off their status by constructing prestige, but not necessarily defensive, dwellings known as ring forts or castles. A ring fort or castle would have looked just like the crannog that you saw earlier, or the hut that you saw earlier, but surrounded by an earthen rampart. Now, and they're often at the bottom of a hill instead of at the top, so they're not really very good defensive. It seems that the function of the earthen bank was primarily for status, nothing to do with any sort of realistic defense. Yeah, it might keep a wolf out. It might keep maybe a couple of chancing local raiders, but that would be about it. Now, luckily, however, much of the ancient legal codes, mythology, and pseudo-history of this period still exist. This is thanks to the 6th to 7th century AD monastic annalists who wrote down extensive written records of this era, even if much of it is of a contradictory, unreliable, and or propagandistic nature. A lot of Irish history work is untangling all the tangles of and trying to work out what is reliable and what isn't from this period. Christianity had reached Ireland possibly in the 4th century, if not even possibly even before, under the influence of we know of a Gallo-Roman missionary known as Palladius. He's the first in the 4th century, to be followed in the 5th century by a much more successful Romano-Briton missionary known as St. Patrick, who I'm sure everybody has heard of, who in his lifetime established a rudimentary hierarchy of bishoprics. Now, I say this is a very rudimentary hierarchy of bishoprics because the bishoprics really didn't have much importance in the early medieval period, which we'll come to next time. But it was the monasteries that were of importance, and they because the church in Ireland soon went off in its own direction, emphasizing poverty, asceticism, and monastic detachment, perhaps originally conceived as an ideological counterbalance, perhaps, to the raiding warfare obsessions of Ireland's secular elites of the time. We have some evidence that this was the case, because peasants, or people who were fed up with oppressive chieftains, would often run off to join the monasteries, where they were very welcome. So this is the map of this era. This is the early Christian period. People are starting to convert to Christianity in a very Irish way of not really, yes, adopting Christianity, but not, and getting, like the chieftains were getting prestige from building these or allowing land for the monasteries and so on to be built. But a lot of the priests, for instance, and the monks would have probably come from the Druid group before, and in fact, there seems to be quite a lot of very diplomatic relationship seems to have developed between the clerics, the new Christian clerics, and the former intellectual elite. And in fact, we think that they more or less merged into one, and that's why we have such a lot of records of the earlier culture, and the pagan beliefs that were also preserved as well. So this here map, that we can see the groups that are starting to emerge in terms of, these are dynastic chiefdoms or dynastic kingdoms, whatever you want to call them. So up in the top right there, you have a remnant group, the Uli, who have been kicked out of they would have originally dominated also the area known as now as Aryila, which is just in the center there. But the Aryila, where that was they were known as the hostage kings. So they were basically subordinated groups connected to the Inyal. Now the Inyal were descendants of Nile of the 9 hostages, we are told, and the Inyal were divided into 2 groups. There was a northern Inyal up in what's now Donegal, Derry region, and then there was the southern Inyal in what is sort of roundabout counties Meath and Westmeath. And then in the west, we can see there's a group called the Connachta, and they were actually related to the Inyal as well, but had by this point split off from them. And then we have in the southeast corner, we have the Layan. Now the Layan are quite interesting because they settled in England, or not in England, sorry, in Wales, because they went over and they gave their name to the Llŷn Peninsula in South Wales. So that's the connection between the Llŷn and the Llŷn Peninsula in South Wales. The Uli were also, if you can see, they also were connected to the Dalriata. Dalriata were the people who formed eventually the Kingdom of Scotland. At that point, they were just Argyll area, but later on they expanded out and conquered what would become the Kingdom of Scotland. Right down in the southwest, you can see this is Munster, or the province of Munster. It was dominated by a group called the Oanachta. The Oanachta were not really, well, they were a sort of dynasty, but they're a very fragmented dynasty, and that area was actually divided up into about 3 or 4 different groups. There's another group called the Dalgoish, who later become much more important. But they were in County Clare, and there was the Osre as well. They were also very important. Their name actually, the Deer people is what their name means. So they actually had an Aboriginal name or an old style name, rather than one of these "I'm descended from Con of the 100 Battles" or "I'm descended from Niall of the 9 Hostages" type names like Iniel and Connacht. Okay, so we can move on to the next picture. We're getting near the end now. So this is an extensive system of roads across Ireland that appeared piecemeal between the late Bronze Age and early medieval era, presumably for trade, but no, they were not really roads as we understand them. They were only known ways across forest, mountain, and bog, and assisted in part by genuine road building efforts wherever the local chief decided it was either essential or it would enhance his reputation to do so. So not quite Roman roads, but you can see them mapped out on the right. These are the established Schlie, or the main highways. They're mapped out in red, going up north, west, and south, roughly from Tara, not exactly from Tara, and there's some question as to whether Tara was really that important at this time, but they do go quite close to Tara. And this is by the 6th century AD. Right, we can move to the last picture now, and I'll finish up. The last picture, that's it, right. So this is the society that was taking shape at the end of the era that we're talking about, the start of the early medieval period. So the society that had taken shape at the start of the early medieval period remained largely voluntarist, decentralized, and I say this with using scare quotes, anarchic. On one level, society was intensely hierarchical and obsessed with individual rank and status. But on another level, it was based around the extended kin group, from a perceived common ancestor of up to 5 degrees of separation. And this was very important for, say, paying off fees or debts or honor price or bride wealth. These sorts of things were hugely important, and so the kin group was a very, very important part of a way of gathering what you needed to pay for some service or some transaction. At the onset of written history of the island is divided up into 100 to 150 autonomous or semi-autonomous tuatha or peoples who all shared a common linguistic and cultural heritage. They may have had different ancestors, but they were pretty sure that all of them were speaking what we call Gaelic by this point, or Q Celtic, but who were fragmented into rival political factions based mainly around consensual alliances or expedients or blood ties. This feature of consensus was applied at all levels for the free population, from top to the bottom. So consensus decision making was basically how you got things done. You could maybe you could obviously tell a slave what to do. You could tell somebody who was unfree what to do, but you couldn't tell everybody else. And you could also break contracts quite easily. So if you got fed up with if you were in a transactional relationship with a chief or an aristocrat, and they were being a bit of an arsehole, and they were pissing you off, then maybe what you might do was just pack up and you go and find somebody else, and set up with them. So and you could never be bought off, you could never be removed from the land. So if you're a free person, you couldn't be removed from the land. You could get up and go, but you couldn't be evicted from the land. So at the top of the social pyramid were the kings, the ri, or dynastic chieftains, who were the primarily military-struck political leaders and yet had no legislative authority. Now, this is important. They had no legislative authority. They couldn't pass their own laws. They were sort of like leaders in war, and they were somebody who engaged with negotiations with a neighboring to her that was maybe causing problems. You would go over you'd send your king across to sort it all out. And they also had ritual purpose. They were always the ceremonial center of the community, but they had no power to pass laws. Under each king were his nobles, the flakes, who officially owned the land and the cattle herds, but they could never alienate them from the people. More or less parallel to the nobles was a class of professional intellectuals and artisans known as the Aistana. The former druids or seers/poets formed the core of this very important group, and they were responsible for all legislative, judicial, and ritual activities run according to the ancient traditions as was orally remembered. They had to have a huge oral memory, these people. They spent 12 years or more learning they learned it all through rhyme, and so they were learning laws, and they were learning myths, and they were learning poems, and they were learning stories. They really had to know everything. Under this came the free commoners, or clients of the nobles, and these were divided, at least by this era, into free, as in owners of cattle but not land, and base, meaning owning neither cattle or land, clients. So free and base clients. It's possible that the free and base distinction was a fairly recent phenomenon, maybe related to these social changes that I've been talking about. Possibly before that, they would all been free. But base didn't mean that you were unfree. It just meant that you were lower down the rank. At the bottom levels, however, came various strata of much more strictly speaking unfree people, from laborers and serfs, either debtors or others with forfeited rights for one reason or another, all the way down to the chattel slaves, who were generally traded or war captives. There was no coinage, and dues or fees were expressed as multiples or fractions of milk cows. So say like one milk cow might be the price for one thing, and then you'd say, well, maybe, you know, if you want this pot, you know, that's the equivalent of a quarter of a milk cow, or I want to marry your daughter. Well, in that case, I'm going to have to pay you in order to get the bride wealth, I'm going to have to pay you half a dozen milk cows or whatever it is. The laws strongly emphasize the principle of restoration over that of retribution. Now, this is very important. They didn't see the law as being a means of getting vengeance. So even if you'd killed somebody, what was important in the law was not to go out and kill somebody else, or kill the murderer, but was to get retribution, restoration from their kin. So that might be expressed again in terms of cattle. So maybe 20 cattle or something like this would have to be paid, or the equivalent thereof. So it was a means of making things better, not making things worse. With every person being valued on their honor price, and so you were valued. One person was not the equal of the other in this sense. So, but payment for judged wrongs were assessed accordingly, with higher prices being paid pro rata by wealthier offenders as opposed to poorer ones. Right? That's quite important as well. So if you were a poorer person, you'd offended, you might only have to pay one milk cow. But if you were, say, the chief had done something really bad, then he might have to pay quite a lot more than that. He might have to pay 10 milk cows. So all the responsibility for payment of fines or sureties, the sureties were very important as well, was collectivized out to the wider kin or group, or Jeravina, as it was known. This is also bride wealth, would have been similarly recruited to pay off bride wealth. Many differing forms of marriage contract existed as well. For temporary and permanent, this paid through a system of bride wealth, sexual relations. So they had several types of marriage. So you could have temporary marriage, you could have a permanent marriage, or you could have something in between. And women could own land and other property as well of their own. And in fact, this forms one of the important scenes that triggers off the main mythological cycle of the Táin, is that the king and the queen of Connacht are comparing how much they have in terms of possessions, and the queen is pretty much neck and neck with the king. But we can speculate that, as is in the case in other cultures where the exchange payment of bride wealth is a feature, that commoner women would have performed the bulk of farming as well as domestic work. And this would have freed up the commoner men to take part in the more recreational pursuits of raiding, feasting, and hunting, etc., together in the company of their aristocratic betters, and indeed this might have been a useful route for them to achieve social advancement for any praiseworthy service that was rendered or initiative shown, say, while you were out cattle raiding or hunting in the forest or whatever. Because we know this from Africa, there's a lot of bride wealth is very important in quite a lot of African cultures, and we know that it seems to be very closely related to women performing the bulk of not only the domestic work, looking after the children and so on and so forth, but also working in the fields. And this would explain why we've got another section of tales the Finn McCool tales, which are much less aristocratic than the chariot thing ones of the Ulster cycle, but these are more like rustic tales, and they were very popular amongst the peasantry, and maybe the but the men don't seem to be doing an awful lot in terms of productive work. So it's possible that this is what was basically going on. So the main division, you know, you have unfree people who will also be doing a lot of the physical work, but it was probably more based around gender than because the unfree would have been a relatively small part of the population, of the total population. So it was probably the women of the commoner class were doing the bulk of the agricultural and pastoral work that was required. Okay, so that you have that little diagram there. It's not a very good diagram, but it gives you an idea anyway. Okay, so I'm now going to finish, and then we can open the floor up for questions.